Just a quick word, first of all, I guess you saw the nacelle, the airlift, going through the acceleration factory earlier. We had a small technical incident. We had to effectuate a security control. Everything is completely under control, but it created a bit of noise, didn't it? So really sorry about that, and thanks a lot for your patience. I hope you've had a very stimulating day. I must say, as an outsider looking in, I saw lots of great work going on. I know the prototypes are going to be underway this evening, so I'm very excited to see all of that. It's now time to welcome our special guest, who is a renowned American economist. He is the author of a fantastic book called The Green New Deal. He saw the changes coming before many and has been a leading voice to encourage that change. To him, the question is not so much, should we shift towards a zero-carbon world, but rather, how do we make this happen? Just a quick word before I invite him to come and join us. No photos, please. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeremy Rifkin.
Good evening, everyone. Always nice to be in Paris, even with a strike. All right, we are heading into the 250th year of the industrial age. Let's do the numbers. Arguably half the human race, most of us here in the West, we are far better off than our ancestors were before we began this experiment in history, correct? I think it's also fair to say, however, that 45% of the human race today, making $5 a day or less, which is the poverty level, are at the best maybe marginally better off, and in many cases, no better off. So while half the human race has done quite well in the industrial age, the other half of the human race not well. The very wealthy have done very well here. Tonight, the 8 richest people in the world, we could put them in one row, 8 individuals today. Their accumulated wealth now equals the accumulated wealth of 1/2 the human beings living on this earth. That's 3.5 billion people. There's something wrong here in the way we've organized this industrial era. But now we have a more profound crisis. The industrial age rides on top of the burial grounds of a previous period of history. 200 years ago, we dug underneath the ground, way underneath the ground, into the burial grounds of the Carboniferous era 350 million years ago, and we exhumed the dead bodies that had morphed into oil, coal, and natural gas. We took them up, and we created an entire civilization. Pesticides, fertilizers, construction materials, preservatives for our foods, packaging, synthetic fiber, pharmaceutical products, power, transport, heat, light. It's endless. And now we've exhumed so much CO2 into the atmosphere and methane and nitrous oxide that we're not getting enough of the sun's heat off the planet. That's what this is all about. Let me explain what climate change is all about, because it's never described, and if it were described, our entire species would be on notice that we've got to change quickly. Climate change changes the water cycles of the Earth. That's what this is all about. It's never described. We're the watery planet. Our ecosystems have evolved over millions of years based on the hydrological cycle that traverses the clouds and bathes our biomes and ecosystems. Here's the rub. For every 1 degree that the temperature is going up from global warming gases, the atmosphere is sucking up 7% more precipitation from the ground. The heat is forcing the precipitation into the clouds. We're getting more concentrated precipitation in the clouds, wild, unpredictable water events. I'll just use North America, my continent. Polar vortex, 90 below zero in the winter, and blockbuster winter snows. In the spring, every year we're flooded across the Mississippi and Missouri basin from Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico. The crops didn't come in this year. The government had to bail out the farmers. And we have entire towns evacuating because there's no flood insurance, and they're doubling up with relatives in other parts of the country. Then, when the floods are over, we hit the summer droughts and wildfires. California's been on fire all the way up until a month ago. And just a few weeks ago, all of Southern California and LA was on fire, and the electric power utility company had to close off the electricity for all of Northern California for fear that the whole state would burn down. This is the 5th largest economy. And then after the droughts and wildfires, we're hit with hurricane season in August to December. We had 5 Category 2, 3, and 4 hurricanes hit our Gulf area. Our ecosystems can't catch up to this in real time. They're collapsing. And so I want you to hear this if you're a parent or grandparent, if you're a millennial starting a family. Our scientists are now telling us we are in the 6th extinction of life on this earth. It doesn't even make the headlines. Most people have never heard of this, and it's the most dramatic story we've ever confronted. We've had 5 extinctions of life on Earth in the last 450 million years, way before we were here. You know, we think we're the youngest species. We've been here 200,000 years, anatomically modern humans. In these other extinctions, there's a tipping point in the chemistry of the planet and very, very quick die-out. And on the average, 10 million years to get new life back. We're in the 6th extinction. We're well into it. Our scientists are chronicling it, and they're saying we're likely to lose over half the species of life on this earth to extinction in the next 8 decades. That's the lifetime of today's toddlers who will be my age. The last time we faced extinction of this magnitude was 65 million years ago. We're totally asleep with some greenwashing. But now the young people are awakening because it's on their watch. They're frightened. They're seeing this in real time where they live. And so this year there were 3 strikes where millions and millions of young people left their high schools, they left their universities, the Gen Zs and the millennials followed them in from their offices, and millions of them congregated in 130 nations and demanded a climate emergency and a global Green New Deal. This isn't like any protest in history. We've had lots of protests around many different things in history. This is of a different ilk. This is the first time an entire cohort of human beings crossed all the boundaries in previous periods of history, and they began to see themselves as a species endangered. This has never happened before. And they began to see their fellow creatures as part of their evolutionary family imperiled. They're imperiled, we're imperiled. And they began to perceive of the biosphere as their indivisible community. They've eliminated the other. And this has never happened in history. This is an extraordinary moment of change in consciousness. So our scientists in the UN panel on climate change says we now have 11 years left to completely transform this civilization. We're already at 1.2 degrees Celsius rise. If we go over 1.5, we get a cascading series of feedback and climatic events that take us into a total rewilding of this earth, and we have no playbook for this. So what do? We need a new economic vision for the world. It has to be compelling. We need a game plan to deliver on that vision quickly. We're going to have to be off, not neutral, not net, off a carbon-based civilization in 20 years. So let's step back for a moment and ask how the great economic paradigm shifts in history occur. If we know how they occur, We are going to get a roadmap here at ENGIE as a first mover on how to make this transition. There have been at least 7 major paradigm shifts in economic history. They're very interesting. They don't happen often serendipitous. And they come together when 3 components merge and converge to create a new infrastructure that fundamentally changes the way our collective humanity organizes our day-to-day economic activity, our social life, our governance. And what are those 3 components? They're all technologies. Number 1, new communication revolutions that allow larger collectivities to come together in more complex arrangements to manage day-to-day life. Number 2, new sources of energy. Again, to bring larger collectivities together in more complex ways of living to power their day-to-day life. Number 3, new modes of mobility and logistics to bring larger collectivities together in more complex arrangements to have the movement they need to maintain their society. When communication revolutions converge with new energy regimes and new modes of mobility and logistics, it changes our habitats. It changes our temporal spatial orientation. It changes our economic models. It changes our governance. And if some of this sounds vaguely familiar, how many of you took high school biology? Where are the people that took high school biology? Nobody here? All right. So every cell and every organism has to have a way to communicate. Every cell and every organism has to have a source of energy to survive. Every cell and every organism has to have some motility and mobility to manage its day-to-day life. Every cell and every organism has to have a habitat, a semi-permeable membrane, skin, shell, to orchestrate its internal rhythms with the circadian, lunar, and circannual rhythms of the world. Our infrastructures, this isn't in any textbook, but this is the way it really happens. Our infrastructures are an extension of our organisms. We bring large amounts of people together collectively to communicate, have new energy, new mobility, and our habitats are our semi-permeable membranes, where we live and where we work. Common sense. 19th century, first industrial revolution, 20th century, second industrial revolution. So here's the Brits. Communication revolution, steam power printing. No more German manual print presses, big leap forward. You could now produce cheap print with steam power, and we could have now textbooks cheap for something new called public school systems. Otherwise, we could never have done universal education. And newspapers, journals, magazines, etc. Then the Brits lay out a telegraph system in the last part of the 19th century. Steam power printing and the telegraph converge with a new source of energy, cheap coal. And it's harvested by the same steam engine. Then, ingenious, they put the steam engine on rails. Locomotives, national transport. Our habitats, semi-permeable membrane changed. We went to dense urban industrial habitats because of hub-to-hub rail traffic. And let me tell you, economic systems don't create infrastructures. Infrastructures create the opportunities for the kind of economic systems that manage them. Governments don't actually create the technology of infrastructures. The infrastructures determine the kind of governance to manage them. So in the first industrial revolution, we went to national markets. We annihilated time and space. And our new governance was nation states to manage national markets. And then we introduced capitalism because no monarchy could ever afford railroads across the country or to extract fossil fuels. You needed stockholding corporations. Second industrial revolution in the United States, another convergence, communication, energy, mobility, built environment. The telephone was a really big deal. It came out of nowhere. We could have conceived of the internet, but not the telephone. All of a sudden, people communicating for thousands of miles away with someone else in real time. Later, radio and television. In the United States, those communication technologies converged with a new source of energy. The Texas oil came in. Then Henry Ford put everyone in the internal combustion engine. We went from semi-permeable membranes in urban environments to suburban build-out. Shopping malls, suburbs, travel and tourism, theme parks, and the work. And that second industrial revolution took the whole world into the 21st century. And here at ENGIE, you know where it peaked. You know. It peaked in July 2008. Remember that month? There's a smile. Brent crude oil hit 147 a barrel. It was a record that month. and the entire global economy shut down. It was already coming for months. That was the great economic earthquake of the fossil fuel civilization and the industrial age built on it. The financial collapse 60 days later was an aftershock. You couldn't keep the fictional subprime Ponzi scheme up when the real economy turned down. And now we are beginning to see we are in the end stages of the fossil fuel civilization. Wherever we have fossil fuels, we have failed states, authoritarian states, with a couple of outliers. Unfortunately, the United States, the #1 producer of fossil fuels, Canada, #4. I won't ask for a raise of hands, but how many of you think we are still in the sunrise or even the crest of the fossil fuel civilization? Just think about it for a moment. Anybody? Then why are we putting in new coal-fired power plants, pipelines, gas-fired power plants? What's going on here? Let me step back. Where do we go from here? Let me share a little anecdote. When Angela Merkel became chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin, actually the first couple of weeks of her new government, to help her address the question of how do we grow the German economy, create jobs on her watch. And when I got to Berlin, here's the first question I asked the chancellor. I said, Madam Chancellor, how do you grow the German economy, create new businesses and jobs, when your businesses are plugged into a second industrial revolution infrastructure, centralized telecommunication, fossil fuel nuclear power, internal combustion transport and logistics, and that infrastructure to manage, power, and move your economy and society? It peaked in its aggregate efficiency in every industrial country in the world in the last 20 years. We had the numbers, and she's a physicist. Aggregate efficiency, you know here, we got a lot of engineers, studied thermodynamics, I hope. Aggregate efficiency is the real mark of the performance of an infrastructure and economy, and it's the ratio of useful to potential work in every conversion of economic activity, from taking all the resources out of nature to shipping them, storing them, producing goods and services on them, consuming them, and recycling. At every conversion, you have to embed a certain amount of energy and material energy into that good or service to get it to the next stage of its journey. Here's what I said to the chancellor. The U.S. started at 3% aggregate efficiency, pretty low. In 1905, we got up to about 14% in the late 90s, our ceiling. Germany got up to 18.5% aggregate efficiency, a little later, ceiling. Japan led the world at 20%, ceiling. That infrastructure we're working on cannot give us any more performance. It's reached its potential. That's why productivity is down. So on that first day, I said, look, to the chancellor, you can have market reform, fiscal reform, labor reform. You can stimulate all sorts of startup companies. It doesn't make any difference, though, if they're plugged into that infrastructure. We've reached this performance level, and it's now dying. Infrastructures have a life and death. So on that first day, we had a discussion about a third industrial revolution, a new convergence of communication, energy, mobility, logistics, and the built environment. And at the end of the day, the chancellor said, Jeremy, we're going to have this for Germany and the European Union. And I will come back to this later. Here's the convergence. And if this sounds familiar, here in this room of Engie, you are a first mover. And everything you're going to hear from here on is what you are doing as a first mover. We're 29 years into the communication internet. It's digital. We all have our smartphones, and we have 4.5 billion people connected. And now China and Korea have a smartphone for $25 with more computing power than sent our astronauts to the moon. There are people in the Amazon, potentially, in quotes, with more power. This is power to the people. This digitized communication internet is now converging with a digitized renewable energy internet. We have millions of players, homeowners, small businesses, large companies, cooperatives, farmers, neighborhoods. They're producing solar and wind. And what they're not using, they're taking that electricity and they're sending it back on an increasingly digitized utility grid and energy internet. And they're using the same big data and analytics to share energy across continents that we use to share news, knowledge, and entertainment on the communication internet. Now these two internets are converging with a third internet, a digitized mobility and logistics internet, made up of electric and fuel cell vehicles, powered by solar and wind from the energy internet, And within the next few years, those vehicles will be autonomous on road, rail, water, and air drones. And they'll be managed by the same big data and analytics that we use to manage our information, news, and knowledge on the communication internet, and then extend energy to all of us on the renewable energy internet. These three internets, all digital, communication, energy, mobility, and logistics, they ride on top of a new built environment. Our habitats are being transformed from the digital revolution. The Internet of Things is here. We're putting sensors across the environment, our agricultural fields, warehouses, smart roads, our appliances, smart buildings, and the buildings are going to become the nodes in this new world for the Internet of Things. We are now have millions and billions of sensors, and by 2030 we will have ubiquitous sensors across the planet. We're creating a brain and nervous system to bring the human race together. The brain is Galileo and GPS. They're synchronizing all the sensors on the ground. In the new era of the Internet of Things, every building becomes retrofitted for climate resilience. That's essential. And they become a node. Each building is an edge data center. How many have heard of this term yet? Edge data center. 3 or 4. You'll hear about it. What's going to happen is the big giant internet and telecom companies with their big data centers or Microsofts, they're not going to be here in 20 years from now, because with the Internet of Things, so much data is now being collected, it overwhelms any centralized, vertically integrated data center in the world. We know this in the industry. And they can't handle it. Edge data centers are being set up and will be everywhere, so they can collect the data on site. The other problem is the big data centers can't handle the latency factor when we're connected. Let's say that your autonomous vehicle is about to crash here in Paris. You're going to send that data to the cloud, and by the time that data comes back, you've crashed. Edge data centers will be everywhere, controlled by homeowners and local cooperatives and local communities, and they'll be able, on the spot, with their fluid platforms, to immediately get the data to them. It's called fog computing. Edge data centers, every building becomes a micro power generation site for your solar and geothermal, and even wind, vertical wind. Every building's a charging station for your electric vehicle. And they begin to connect across the world. This is going to take us from the second industrial revolution, which gave us globalization, IMF, OECD, World Bank, to the third industrial revolution, glocalization. It's already happening. Everything I'm telling you is happening. And energy's part of it, as you know. So now the cost of connecting with each other over communication, now energy and mobility and logistics, the fixed costs are going down, the marginal costs are near zero. So regions all over the world are bypassing nation states and even Fortune 500 companies, and you have very smart, high-tech SMEs that are actually beginning to create lateral networks all over the world. It's a game changer. Not going to change back. So on the upside, this is a great potential democratization of commerce, a lateralization. We could bring the human race together in real time. And it's kind of interesting because the young people are on the streets saying we're part of one biosphere, we're a single species, we're part of our fellow family, and now we're actually creating the infrastructure to allow them to actually engage each other globally all over the world. The timing is good. But then there's the dark net. How do we ensure in this Internet of Things world that we keep network neutrality, everyone has equal access? How do we ensure that governments don't purloin this global brain and nervous system to intervene into the political affairs of other countries? It's rampant already. How do we ensure that these internet companies and telecom companies and others don't take all of our data and personal experiences, commodify it, and then take over our personal agency? That's happening. How do we protect privacy, prevent malware and cyber terrorist attacks? This is heavy-duty stuff, this dark net. We're going to have to spend as much regulatory time and social capital on struggling with the dark net. And the way we're going to deal with it is the more redundant and the more resilient and the more distributed the infrastructure, the less vulnerable it is to a breakdown. So if you have a climate event, a cyber terrorist attack, the power grid goes down, you can go off the main grid of this third industrial revolution infrastructure, re-aggregate in mini grids to keep your mobility moving with your electric vehicle, your power storage for your electricity, your communication. This is already happening. The more distributed, the less vulnerable. So here's what the possibility is. Let's say you're a cooperative or a small, medium-sized enterprise here in Paris, or a big company. You can go up on this emerging Internet of Things now. And you can get a transparent picture of all the data going through the system. Most of it's free. And you can mine that big data with your own analytics. You can create your own algorithms and apps in your company. So you can dramatically increase your aggregate efficiency at every single conversion across your value chains, dramatically reduce your carbon footprint because you're getting more out of each conversion and losing less of the earth. That's aggregate efficiency. And then you plunge your fixed and marginal cost. I want you to keep thinking about NG's new business model as I go through this, all right? Because you're at every step of this, all right? Some of the marginal costs are getting so low because of this tremendous digital aggregate efficiency that it's forcing a shift in capitalism. Capitalism's too slow. It's a transactional economy. You have a seller, a buyer. They come together, you make the deal, and then it's over. And the downtime, you have to pay your employees with their pension funds and their employees. You have to have advertising and marketing and warehouse costs and all of that. So what's happening is that in a world where the marginal costs go way down, we're in trouble. We always teach in economics that the optimum market is marginal cost. You want to sell at marginal cost, put out cheap goods and services, win over market share, bring some nice profit back to the investors. It's just we never expected a digital revolution so powerful in its aggregate efficiency that it could really plunge those marginal costs. You know what I'm saying here? And then your margins are less. When the margins are less, capitalism is metamorphosing into something beyond itself. We are moving from transactions to flows. Digital are flows. We're moving from markets to networks. We're moving from sellers and buyers to providers and users. We're moving from productivity to regenerativity. We're moving from externalities to circularity. We're moving from GDP to quality of life indicators. Why? When your margins are low, you move to digital platforms that allow you to have 24/7 traffic because they're only providers and users, and you don't have any downtime. So even though your margins are low, you can keep your margins together. This is the new business model that's emerging. Some of the margins are getting so low, however, and just some goods and services, that it's given birth to the sharing economy. This is the first new economic system to enter the world stage since capitalism in the 18th century, socialism in the 19th century. Now, right now, this sharing economy, we have millions of people right now tonight who are sharing their own music, their YouTube videos. They're sharing massive open online college courses. They're getting college credits. They're putting up social blogs. And then there's Wikipedia. I don't know how Jimmy Wales came up with it, but it works. We have democratized the knowledge of the world in 15 years. This is extraordinary. This is the 5th largest website. And if you eliminate the pornographic websites, it's #1. And this website runs on nonprofit $50 million in donations. We each give them $1. We democratize education. It's extraordinary. Now, some of the sharing economy has been taken over by the Ubers and the Facebooks and the Ubers and the Googles and the Airbnbs. But this first generation in Silicon Valley didn't understand the infrastructure. They tried to take a vertically integrated model for a second industrial revolution and first industrial revolution and graft it onto the third. Let me explain. The first and second industrial revolution infrastructures are engineered to be centralized, top-down, proprietary and intellectual property. You had to vertically integrate the organizations to manage it because it's so expensive to extract fossil fuels and move them through the entire economy. The third industrial revolution from an engineering proposition is totally different. It's designed to be distributed. It works best if it's open and transparent. You get the network effect. There's no zero-sum game. The more in the network, the more everyone benefits in the network. You want to laterally scale it. So this first generation in Silicon Valley tried to implant this vertical integrated organization. It doesn't work. And now with edge data centers coming in all over the world, and with the data now being distributed and lateral, we're moving in a new direction. And if this sounds familiar, that's the same with the sun and the wind. Fossil fuels had to be vertically integrated. They're found in a few places. You need to weaponize the world. We've had 2 world wars over coal in the Ruhr Valley. But the sun and the wind are everywhere. They're distributed. So the big power companies finally have learned you cannot collect the sun and the wind everywhere. You can't control every landscape. So little co-ops have formed, and farmers associations and small businesses all over the world. Everyone's going to generate this. So where does this take us? Let's go back and take a look at Germany. Germany, I worked with Germany, Sigmar Gabriel, during the transition, and the folks there. And what happened in Germany is very interesting. And it spread throughout the EU. When we put in the 20-20-20 formula in the EU, it actually forced new innovation in solar and wind to get the price down, right? And when the price went down, everything changed. Some of you older people may know that the fixed cost of 1 solar watt in the 1970s was $78. You know what the cost of 1 fixed watt is tonight? It isn't $78, it's 43 cents. 35 cents in 18 months from now. It's plunging. We now have power and utility companies in the last 18 months, I don't know if you're doing this, but they are buying long-term 20-year contracts right now for solar and wind at 5 cents, 4 cents, 3 cents, and 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour right now. And here's what's just happened. Here's the game changer. In 2019, this year, the levelized cost of solar and wind utility scale just dipped below the cost of natural gas. Did you hear what I just said? Way below nuclear, way below coal, way below oil, now below natural gas. The fixed costs are plunging, and the marginal cost is zero, near zero. The sun and the wind have never invoiced us. Fossil fuels, uranium, are extractive energies. They're very costly. What's happening now, within the industry, as you know, in the banking and financial community, is the beginning of what I would call a dramatic disruption. A dramatic disruption. To its credit, Citigroup, they saw this coming. And about 4 years ago, they projected that we may be sitting on $100 trillion in stranded assets in the fossil fuel complex and related industries. The largest economic bubble in all of human history. And then Mark Carney, the president of the Bank of England, saw it right after that. And you remember he went to Lloyd's of London and he said, we got a problem. And then he set up a global task force, which you know about, where the whole financial and banking community now has to set up metrics around stranded assets to make sure they're not trapped. Stranded assets, that means as solar and wind keeps plunging, it means all the exploration rights the energy companies will never amortize out. All the fossil fuels that'll stay under the ground or under the ocean floor, they'll never amortize out. It's all the pipelines that will be abandoned. It's all the petrochemical factories, refineries that will never be used. And then the whole complex that goes with it. And we're still putting in fossil fuel plants that will never amortize out. So here's what happened in Germany. They didn't see it coming. I worked with EMBW when Utz Clausen was there. EMBW, RWE, E.ON, and Vattenfall. We thought they were invincible. They didn't understand the nature of disruptions. Schumpeter didn't get it either. Around 2005, there was only, 7% solar and wind in the grid in Germany and around Europe? So who cares? What they didn't realize, and this is important, it's not how important and how powerful the incumbent is and how much of the market they claim. It's how fast the challenger's coming into that market. When electricity challenged gas lighting, when electricity got to 3% of the market, it was moving so quick the investment left gas lighting. So here's what happened. When solar and wind in Germany got to 14% of the electricity in the grid, that was the inflection point. You may remember that between 2010 and, that was in 2017, but the 5 years before that, hundreds of billions of euros lost across Germany and Europe in the power and utility industry. Everybody suffered this fate. The US gets to 14% solar and wind in our grid in 2023. The world gets to 14% solar and wind in 2028. Does this mean the end of the power and electricity companies? No, if they change their business model. First movers. So back in 2009, Eon asked if I would debate Mr. Tyson, the chairman. He's still there. And what I said, we had a 2.5-hour conversation. I said, you're not leaving the second industrial revolution tomorrow, but I'm telling you, this is 2009, this disruption is going to hit in 3 or 4 years. And if you're not there with a new business model that can move your revenue forward while you take your legacy business out, you're going to be gone. And I said, in the new business model, you don't generate any electricity. Everyone's going to generate the electricity wherever they are. We're putting solar in paint now in class. We're putting it in everything. We're going to all send the electricity to you, and you're going to make more money by selling even less electricity. You won't generate, you'll sell less. He said, I don't understand this. How do we make money? I said, you're going to set up partnerships with thousands of businesses, even homeowners, but businesses all over Germany and Europe. And you're going to help those businesses manage the energy flowing through their value systems, their logistics, their production, their distribution. You're going to help them with their analytics and algorithms so those thousands of businesses can dramatically increase their aggregate efficiency at every single conversion 24/7 in this provider user network. And then they're going to share those aggregate efficiency performance gains back with the power and electricity company in performance contracts. He waited too long. He put the fossil fuel nuclear on the market 2.5 years ago, 0 bidders, stranded. All the 4 companies in Germany are doing this, and I should say, you should be pretty proud of yourself in this room. I've been watching ENGIE from a distance for the last few years, and I'm not saying this because I'm here. You are first mover, right at the top of the list in this room tonight. But you've got to even move quicker to show your leadership here, because you are really at the top of the list right now. So it's not just Europe, it's now China. I'd never been there, but when President Xi and Premier Li came in, Premier Li, they put out their biography, and Premier Li said he had read The Third Industrial Revolution, the book. Who knew? It was just serendipitous. And he said he instructed the Development Reform Commission, the State Council, move on the narrative I'm sharing you tonight. I've had 4 official visits with the leadership, with Wang Yang on the standing committee, and with the State Council, the MIIT, et cetera. And I got to tell you, they move so quick. 11 weeks after the first visit, they announced $80 billion to completely digitize the state grid so that millions of Chinese people in the communities could buy their own solar and wind because they're the #1 producers, and then send electricity back to the grid. Watch the EU, watch China. In America, watch California. There's a battleground state in Texas between wind and fossil fuels, and watch New York. The coming together of the communication internet with the energy internet makes possible the mobility and logistics internet. How many of you here are under the age of 42 and qualify as a millennial? Raise your hands real high. I want to see who you. You are the problem. You are the problem. You have really thrown us a curve here, because apparently you do not want to own automobiles. Don't you understand? We built the entire second industrial revolution around the automobiles. Suburban build out, everything. You instead prefer access to mobility in car sharing networks, not ownership in vehicles in old-fashioned markets. That's grandma and grandpa. You're moving from sellers and buyers to providers and user networks. You're moving from transactions to flows. For every car you're sharing, we're eliminating 18 to 15 cars. We know this. I work in the industries. We know we're going to eliminate 80% of the vehicles in the next 25 years. The remaining vehicles, electric, fuel cell, in car sharing networks where you have 4 people at a time and your logistics knows when to drop them off where. Does this mean, now let me explain the curve here. Where's the inflection point with transport? We only are putting out 2.5% annual sales in electric vehicles this year, but by 2023, electric vehicles will be competitive without subsidy. By 2026, they'll be cheaper. By 2028, 20% of the vehicles in the world will be EVs. Think electric utilities. You're going to provide all the power. This is a massive shift in revenue. And what's interesting about this, we consume 93 million barrels of oil a day in the world. 93 million. 2/3 of that 93 million barrels of oil that we consume a day goes to transport. Now transport's going to the electricity grid. We have to factor the enormous opportunities here, all right? All of these facts I'm telling you are in the books you have tonight. These are all internal studies footnoted from the industries in the last 18 months. Banking, finance, insurance, transport, electric utilities, et cetera. To show you how serious it is, I was in Chicago in October. They had the annual meeting of the CTOs of all the platforms for transport. They're all doing it. Let's look at Volkswagen. Volkswagen, #1 producer. They just announced in June that they're putting out the last internal combustion platform ever in 2026. They just announced 80 billion euros. 80 billion euros to move to EVs. Have you ever heard of a company putting 80 billion euros? They say they're going to produce 22 million EVs by 2028, quarter of production. They've just joined with Bechtel, and the power companies, you should hear this, and they're putting in 35,000 charging stations in the next 3 years. Big opportunities for electric utilities. So, does this mean the end of transport? No, but they have to change their business model. So I've been working with Daimler over the years. So Wolfgang Bernhardt, he was the chairman of Daimler Trucks and on the board of Daimler. A few years ago, Wolfgang said, come to Germany, we're going to introduce the mobility internet. So I came, we laid out the narrative, and then he had 300 journalists there. He really surprised them. He said, well, we've been quietly outfitting 350,000 Daimler trucks with sensors all over the outside of the cabs. And they are picking up data across Europe. Weather conditions, traffic flow, warehouse availability as they come in and out, and sharing it with their partners. And what these vehicles are now is they're mobile big data centers. So then we went to a helicopter feed live. They zoomed down on 3 trucks on the German expressways in transit, and they told the drivers to take your hand off the wheel and your foot off the pedal. They had been retrained, and they put the screen as logistics experts, and they were monitoring real-time traffic like edge data centers will. They could instantly get to anywhere, anytime, in any warehouse so that you have no deadheading. And industries could have cooperatives and share those spaces. Smart. Smart. Where does this take us? $11 trillion have now exited the fossil fuel complex. It's a stampede in the last 4 years. And it's being led by public pension funds. Karl Marx would be flipping in his grave about what I'm about to tell you, would never have gotten this. It turns out that the capitalists in the world are hundreds of millions of workers with pension funds. It's the largest pool of capital in the world. It's $41 trillion, deferred wages, invested for retirement. They're getting out, led by public pension funds. New York, London, every major city, 50 of them got out in the last year. Why? They saw what happened to the coal industry in the United States. They went bankrupt in the last 4 years. Peabody, all the coal companies. Natural gas cheaper, now solar and wind cheaper than natural gas. So they're going to go bankrupt. And none of the workers got their pension. So the big cities are saying we can't have millions and millions of public employees stranded. So they have exited fossil fuels. They have trillions of dollars, and they desperately want to invest in third industrial revolution infrastructure. They're willing to get out of the equity market and get into low interest bonds, even at low returns, because they'll get steady returns over 20 years of a pension lifetime. Here's the problem. We don't even need new taxes. Here's the problem. Trillions of dollars wanting to invest in a scale-up, which would allow Engie and other companies to begin moving in each region with local SMEs and get the job done, and you know why, I know why you're nodding. We have no scale projects anywhere in Europe. The only scale project in Europe is the London sewer system that's being redone. So even though the market is speaking and it's clear, and we're facing a great carbon bubble, we're likely to see the fossil fuel civilization collapse somewhere around 2028, could be a little sooner, a little later. No scale project. And the reason is, if you go to the 9,000 cities that have signed up for the climate accords, and the mayor, you talk to the mayor, and the mayor will show you their 12 electric buses. Photo. They'll show you their 15 positive power buildings. Photo. They'll show you their bike pass and their apps. Photo. They're all pilots. So the irony of this situation is we're seeing the collapse of the fossil fuel civilization. We've got trillions of dollars trying to invest. But businesses don't actually plan infrastructures. Governments do. Businesses don't set up interstate highway systems and national power grids to regulate and public school systems. So in Europe, I was privileged to work with the European Union over all these years. It's been 20 years, and we announced Smart Europe. I joined Meryl Sefcovic, Vice President of the Energy Union, now Vice President on the new Commission of Overall Planning. We joined with the Committee of the Regions 2 years ago. We announced Smart Europe, the plan I'm laying out tonight. We have a similar plan announced in China called China Internet Plus. So here's what I'm saying to the young people. Stay up on the streets, nonviolent, peaceful protests, keep the pressure on. But if you think all you have to do is ask government to make these changes, it is not going to happen. It isn't because your parents are of ill will. They're of a different generation. So when the young people go to their elected officials in the local cities and their regions and they say, we're in a climate emergency. We want a global Green New Deal. And you know what the officials tell them? They say, we agree with you. This is a climate emergency. We want a Green New Deal. And we think it's one of the major priorities on the schedule. The minute they hear one of the major priorities, they say, you have to be kidding, the young people. What other priorities might there be? What other priorities might we have to balance this against when we're facing extinction? So what I say to the young people, you need to move aside an older generation who are vested with old interest. And I don't know how people come home that are in these industries and talk to their children just because they're more worried about the quarterly statement than they are the future of their own children and the human race. Shameful. So what I said to the young people, you got to sweep out this older generation and you got to be in political office. You got to be in the NGOs. You got to be in businesses like Engie that know how to do this thing. You know how to make this happen. Last week, the new Prime Minister of Finland, she's 35 years old. She'll get the job done. Last year, Alexandria Cortez, 28 years old, the youngest member in the Congress. We need millions and millions of young people to move in quickly. I'm only guardedly hopeful here. I've spent 50 years, a half a century, and I didn't realize how fast these feedback loops on climate were going to happen. We lost the time. But I'm guardedly hopeful because the young people are coming home with biosphere consciousness. They're saying to their parents, why is electricity on in that TV? We haven't been in there in 3 weeks. Turn it off. Why are you using so much water while you're shaving? We have drought. Or they could be saying to their dad, why are you golfing here in the desert that's being irrigated when we have droughts and wildfires? Why 2 cars? Car share 1. Here's the one I like, and I'll reference this with President Macron. He did something that I admire. In September, 190 countries in the world, he was the only world leader that stood up and said to the president of Brazil, put out the fires in the Amazon. These are the lungs of the planet. You remember this? He was trying in an intuitive way to say we're all part of one biosphere. There are no borders. The lithosphere, the biosphere, the atmosphere, the magnetosphere, the circadian lunar rhythms, the sun and the wind, they just don't know these borders. What did the president of Brazil say? Sovereign territory. There you had it. Biosphere politics. We're all in one planet together. geopolitics, it's all sovereign territory. But what President Macron could have said, and this is what the young people would say, that have bouts for conscience, why did they burn those trees down? He didn't ask that. They burned the trees down in the Amazon, the lungs of the planet, to get 6 inches of topsoil to graze a cow for a piece of beef on the French plate and around the world. We know this everywhere. And when they graze the cow to get that piece of beef on the plate, all the wild species that only live in the Amazon, they go extinct. And when the trees aren't there anymore to absorb CO2 emissions from industrial activity, the temperature of the planet goes up. Some farmer can't feed her children in rural India. She's getting spring floods, summer droughts because of the wildfires. These young people are understanding now, it's the cruel lesson of climate change, really, but it's the silver lining. They're realizing that everything we do, every moment of the day, each of us affects some other human being, some other species, some other ecosystem, and the biosphere we live in. We always thought we were autonomous in the age of progress. We're not. We're all related to and dependent on everything else in this beautiful little experiment called life on Earth. So here's my hope. I accepted this invitation to be here because, and I don't grade inflate, NG is a first mover. And while you have to be attentive to your legacy businesses, you've got to move quickly. And you've got to be at the head of the pack all over the world. And you have to move to the new business models where you manage energy, dramatically increase aggregate efficiency, reduce carbon footprint, get your returns from those efficiencies, and scale up as regions scale up around the world to be there with them with your expertise. So that when your grandchildren look back at you, NG, world player, and ask, what did you do? You can say, we did what we had to do. It was tough, it was a little scary, but we had no choice here. It wasn't about a little of this, a little of that. We had to move quickly and we had to move intelligently to set the pace for everybody else. So you have a tremendous responsibility in this room because there are not very many first movers. And if you waver, others will not come forward. If you're strong and resilient, others will come forward. So I'm hopeful we can possibly make this. So I'm going to end with one little thought, because I know a lot of parents are saying, can we do this? We're at 1.3 already. If we go over 1.5, we're in trouble. But let me say, we are the most social creature. We have the biggest neocortex. It's amazing what human beings do when we put these infrastructures together as social beings. In my country, we laid out the entire first industrial revolution infrastructure between 1860 and 1890, 30 years. We laid a railroad system across the entire continent. We laid a telegraph system across the entire continent. We gave millions of acres of land, a third of the land, to settlers to create the habitats. We put in a new thing called public universities to train the workforce for the industrial age. We did it in 30. Second industrial revolution, we did the urban areas in 25 years, from 1908 to 1932. We laid out electricity across the urban areas. We laid out the phone systems. We put out millions of vehicles. We created highways and suburbs. In the urban areas, we did it in 25. We can do this revolution in 20 because it's so agile, it's so distributed, the costs are so cheap, and now lower than all the other costs we would use. We can do it in 20. We need the energies of the world to help us lay out national electricity grids, high voltage direct line grids. And I've been with other companies in the last few weeks. I've been with Vinci in the last few weeks. I was with the CEO of Nexen last night. You've got the best expertise in France. I may say, Germany has the automobiles, all right? They're good. And Germany has manufacturing, but France has all the infrastructure expertise you would need between all these companies, from Bouygues to Vinci to Nexen to NG. It's endless list. Tomorrow morning, start fresh. Congratulate yourself for what you've done, but say you haven't even begun. And lead everyone forward to this third industrial revolution so we can create a more ecological approach to our life on this planet and hopefully sustain for future generations this miracle called life.
Thank you
Thank you and good night.
Isabel, come and join me. Please give Jeremy Rifkin a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Just a word, Isabel, maybe.
So, Jeremy, thanks a lot for your vision. You are a visionary leader. You have anticipated this revolution far before everybody. So that's for all of us extremely inspiring. You have in front of us here 1,000 NG leaders, and they are really committed to your vision, really committed to zero carbon transition. So really for us, your encouragement is absolutely great. We have decided to be a first mover. We all know you are a first mover, so you know that perfectly. Not always easy to be a first mover, so thank you for your encouragements. That's really a gift for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Just to let you know that you'll be getting a copy of Jeremy's book this evening. The English version is available to be downloaded, and the French version is available as well. And Jeremy would be very happy to sign the books this evening at the cocktail. He's going to stay with us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for the last moment of the day, we would like to welcome on stage Jean-Pierre Clamadieu. Merci de l'accueillir.